It's Tuesday class time. So excited to jump on here with you for our Tuesday Jeep educational quick class. August is dedicated and focused on building your Jeep. We're building on last week's class about building your Jeep and modifying it, moving into talking gears and gear ratios. Today, we are focused on the gear ratio. You hear a lot of talk about gear ratios, especially when going to a bigger tire on your Jeep and looking at what gear ratio you have. We're going to talk about that today, and what gear ratio you need to regear to. We're going to talk about that today too. I feel like the most commonly talked about aspect of owning a Jeep can be, you'll hear, well, what gear ratio do you have? Where are you starting? If you go to put a bigger tire on, you know you're going to have to re-gear, change your gear ratio. So let's dive in and let's really look at the gear ratio. Let's talk about it. Let's get a deeper understanding together today. Because remember, knowledge builds confidence. All right, we're just going to dive right in and let's get this out of the way. The most commonly asked question. And I want to talk about it right now here at the beginning, because this is what I get asked the most. And I feel like this is probably the most common question. Do I need to regear when I go to a bigger tire? Yes. The answer is yes. And we're going to dive in today so that you understand why that answer is yes. Not just me sitting here telling you that the answer is yes, but let's look at why the answer is yes. First off, how do I know what gear ratio I am starting at? So, like, if you are going to go put a bigger tire on your Jeep, you need to know where your starting point is. Well, first of all, great news. If your Jeep is stock or you bought your Jeep brand new, you can either look on the window sticker, or if you get underneath your Jeep, and this is actually kind of fun, get underneath your Jeep and you're going to be looking for stamped on the differential itself is going to be your gear ratio. So as long as you bought your Jeep brand new, you would know from the window sticker or what the factory specs are, what gear ratio you have in your Jeep. What if you bought your Jeep used? You don't know what has been modified. You don't know if somebody re-geared it. You don't know what changes have been made to your Jeep. And that is fair. Like when you buy a used Jeep, you don't always know exactly what has been done. We are going to talk about there are two different ways that you can tell for yourself and know what gear ratio you have in your Jeep, especially if you bought it used. That way, you'll know for sure what your starting platform is, what gears you have in your Jeep, because we're going to be talking about how tire size and gears go together today as we're talking gear ratios. So you want to know what you have, because then you'll know if you need to change or what tires you can run on your Jeep with the gears that it currently has before you need to re-gear. First way that you can check is a gear ratio test. Safely jack up the rear end of your Jeep and put it on jack stands. Remember safety first. You're always going to chalk your front tires. I recommend, because you're going to be using a jack to lift the rear end up, chalk in front of and behind both front tires. Is that overkill? It is, but there's no such thing as overkill when we're talking about safety. Make sure you have the correct jack to use with your vehicle. Safety first. Make sure you have the correct jack stands. So make sure you have the correct weight jack stands when you go to do this exercise. If you need reviews on any jack safety, we have that available, because remember, safety, safety, safety first. Let's jump into the actual exercise. You're going to jack up the rear end of your Jeep. You're going to put jack stands underneath it. And of course, carefully when you're securing your Jeep on jack stands. Do not ever sacrifice safety. Then you are going to take either a piece of tape or a brightly colored Sharpie, because you really want to make sure to do this step as we're doing this. I've had people say, oh, you can just eyeball it. You don't have to have a piece of tape or a pen. We want to make sure this is a surefire way. We don't want any room for error. You're going to mark your tire in any location. Then you are going to put a piece of tape or mark on your drive shaft with a brightly colored Sharpie. You want to make sure those marks are going to be easy to see because you want to make sure that you do this again correctly. So you're going to have to be able to see those marks on the tire, see those marks on your drive shaft. Once you have made those marks, I recommend having a second person if you're going to be doing this exercise. I feel like there's room for error if you are rotating your tire and counting the rotations on the drive shaft at the same time. So one person who is just focusing on the tire rotation, one person who is just going to be focusing on counting the rotations of the drive shaft. So here's the exercise itself. You are going to rotate the tire one full rotation. That's why you have it marked. Take that mark and get it dead center at the top of the tire. Then you're going to concentrate on just a full rotation. So watch one full rotation, stop when that mark is at the same spot. While that tire is rotating, one full rotation, someone else is going to be counting how many times your drive shaft turns. Take a note. Make sure that you are paying attention. How many times and how much rotation is there on that drive shaft? So once you have that, then you are going to say, let's say, for example, my drive shaft rotated 4.5 times for the one tire rotation. That would mean I had a 450 gear ratio. So that would be a 456 gear ratio in my Jeep. So again, that's how you would calculate it. For how many times the drive shaft turns for one full tire rotation, that is going to be your gear ratio. Use a tape measure so that you know for sure, are we talking about a 321? This is how you're going to know what gear ratio you have. That is one way. Another way, when we were talking about knowing what gears you have in your Jeep, if you don't know, you can count the teeth on the gears themselves. You're going to see your ring gear, which is the big gear, your pinion gear. You will go ahead and you're going to count the number of teeth that are on your ring gear. Again, I recommend having either like the notes up on your phone, having a piece of paper and a pen, something to write stuff down. If you are like me, I may think I'm going to remember, like I'll remember how many teeth were on the ring gear. Well, then when I start counting the pinion gear, I forget what the ring gear number was, and then I have to recount. So I recommend always plan ahead, be prepared, write everything down because we're trying to alleviate any chance of error as we're doing these exercises. Then go ahead and count the teeth pinion gear. So you've started with the ring gear, then you're going to count the number of teeth on your smaller pinion gear. Once you have both numbers written down, this is how you get your actual gear ratio. You are going to take the number of teeth from the ring gear. So your big ring gear you counted first. You're going to take that number, write it down on your piece of paper. Divide that number by the number of teeth that there were on your smaller pinion gear. That is going to give you your exact gear ratio as well. If you have a used Jeep and you're not sure, you don't know if it's been regeared, those are two surefire ways that you can know for sure and find out what gear ratio is currently in your Jeep. I wanted to share that starting with knowing what number gear ratio you are starting with. Because let's look at the gear ratios. The most common, and I know I'm mostly talking JK, JL, JT Gladiator generation here when we're talking about this. So this is kind of the most common gear ratios when we are talking about the kind of newer generation Jeeps. If you have a CJ, a YJ, a TJ, an LJ, we have our generations training that goes in depth into what gears are in there as well. And I will talk a little bit about that. Older generation Jeeps, engines and transmissions played a part in what gear ratio was in that vehicle. Again, especially if you have an older generation Jeep, you don't know what modifications have been made to it, where it is a little bit older year. So I recommend, unless it is bone stock and has never been touched, always know your gear ratio for yourself. So we're just going to go through this for a minute. These are actual gear ratio numbers: 321, 345, 373, 410, and 456. Now let's talk about where those were the most common too. If your Jeep is bone stock, do remember Jeep like to make things confusing for us. So depending on the packages and depending on your additional upgrades, that can change axles, that can change gear ratios. Do keep that in mind. Recommend make sure you have your Jeep build sheet, your Windows sticker, know for sure what is in your Jeep. So there it is definite if you haven't made any changes yet. The reason I'm talking about this is I want you to know what the most common stock gear ratios are so that you know kind of where your stock starting point is in your Jeep. As we look at these numbers, okay, so you see I have them in order. You're going to notice as that number gets bigger, so as the gear ratio gets bigger, it's getting deeper. So for example, the 321, when you get to a 373, that is a deeper gear set. So as that number gets bigger, you're getting a deeper gear set. And we're going to talk about what that means. As that number gets bigger, your ring and pinion gear gets smaller. That doesn't matter what axle you have. As the ring and pinion gear, as that ratio gets bigger, the ring and pinion gear gets smaller. Keep that in mind as well. So what do I mean when I'm talking about a deeper gear? So off-road, you're getting more crawl. You're getting I call it like this deeper crawl, kind of like that growly from your Jeep. But what it really means is it's the number of times the drive shaft turns to one rotation of your tire. So it's just like that exercise. That is what is determined. So if you have a 321 for one rotation of your tire, the drive shaft rotates 3.21. So we're going to say almost a quarter rotation. So what does that have to do with the tires, the gear, the Jeep, any of that? All right. So now we're going to look at this. The deeper the gear, so the bigger the number, that changes the power that is being put out and what RPM the power is being put out at. So the RPM changes. So you're putting out power and giving more power as you start to go from a stop. For example, if you have a 321 with a stock tire, so we're going to say a stock tire is 30 inches, okay? So you have a 321 gear ratio, 3.21, 321 gear ratio. Stock Jeep has a 30-inch stock tire on it. So when you are at a red light, you go to pull off from that red light and you hit the gas, the RPM to start and to move that stock 30-inch tire from a stop is what is required. Okay, so let's say you have that 3.21. Now, so let's say when you go to put your foot on the gas, I'm just really making up numbers here on this part to explain it. So please don't take this part seriously. But let's say you have 30-inch tires, you have a 321 bone stock, you're at a red light, light turns green, you go to hit the gas. Let's say your RPMs are at 2,000 and you're starting to move, and you get up to, 5 miles an hour, you're at 2,000 RPM and the tires are spinning and you're accelerating, but you're at that great 2,000 RPM, tires are spinning, it's moving. Now for an example, let's say we put 33-inch tires on that Jeep with the same gear ratio of a 321 or 3.21. We're sitting at a red light. Now we're going to go to pull off of that red light, and your RPMs are at 3,200. RPMs go up. You're going past 2,000, but you're not moving yet. RPMs hit 3, and then the Jeep starts to move and get to 5 miles an hour. So with the lower gear ratio number, when you put the bigger tire on it that it's not equipped for, you're losing your low end, which means your ability to accelerate, your ability to get those tires rotating. It is taking a higher RPM, requires more power from the vehicle, the transmission, the engine to get the tire moving. If you put a deeper, so bigger number gear ratio in that setup, in that differential with the bigger tire, it keeps the power required from the engine and the transmission and the RPMs balanced. So you're balancing torque and you're balancing power. When you start talking about regearing and you see these numbers, there's a mechanical, scientific reason you need to regear so there's balance. Now, could you, for example, have those 30-inch tires, stock Jeep, 321 gears, and happily drive it around? It accelerates, you hit 2,000 RPM and you're accelerating forward. You're at 5 miles per hour. RPMs are still at 2,000. You're good. Then you go to put the 33s on there. Could you drive it around town with those 321 gear set in there with the RPMs required higher? So the power outtake from the engine and transmission that is required is higher, putting more stress on the transmission and the engine of your Jeep to move the tires. Could you do that? You could do that. Do you want to do that long term? No, you do not want to do that long term. So that is why we're going to jump into our next question, which is why we regear. So that right there is the reason, one, of why you want to regear. You are trying to keep a balance in torque, a balance in power required, balance in RPM, what it takes to move the tire by the engine and transmission of your Jeep. The RPMs that your vehicle is going to be at, you want to have that balance of torque, balance of power, balance of your engine and your transmission. That is why you want to regear for on the road. Let's talk about, in my opinion, the second reason you really want to regear your Jeep if you go to a bigger tire, and that is off-road functionality. So not only when we go to a bigger tire are we thinking about how it's going to drive on-road, but let's talk about how it's going to drive off-road. Even if you don't ever plan to take it off-road, I want you to know what the benefit off-road is going to be when you do regear. You're keeping the balance. You're keeping the RPM balance, the torque, the balance of power required, and everything lives harmoniously and happily. And you have a great daily driver and you get to go on awesome trips. Now you're going to take it off-road. So by regearing, when you are talking about what you're going to gain off-road, when you put your Jeep in for low, you're going to get more low end or crawl ability on the trail. Basically, what that means is you can go slower at the same RPM in for low. So it's allowing you, when you're daily driving, to be at the same RPM, going the same speed with the same tire or the bigger tire size when you regear. Well, off-road, you're getting a slower speed at that same RPM in for low. And that is so important if you're talking about your ability to crawl, your ability for your low end while you're in four-wheel drive. So I'm going to do a really quick example of this, just like I did for driving on the road. Let's say you're on the trail. And again, I'm making numbers up as we're talking, so please don't take these literally. I just want to have great examples to help to explain it. So let's say you're on the trail and you're in four low in first gear. So first gear if you're in a manual, or manual mode 1 if you're in an automatic. So you're getting your four low and then your first gear reduction. Let's say instead, so before you regeared, let's say your 321 gears on 30s. Now you went to, let's say 35s and regeared to 456s. So you're balanced. So instead of going, let's say 7 miles an hour at 1500 RPMs. Now you're going 5 miles an hour at 1500 RPM. Basically, you're getting the same 1500 RPMs, but instead of when you're at 1500 RPMs, you're at 7 miles an hour. Now you're going slower. So at your 1500 RPMs, you're going 5 miles an hour. That might not sound like a big difference, but it really does make a difference when you go to regear and you get that low end and you can be going a slower speed at your same or higher RPM, because this is especially important if you're talking about a manual. Why? I talk a lot about stall points and knowing your stall points. So when you talk about regearing, the deeper that gear is, that is going to change your stall point. So let's say, I know I'm going really in depth today, but let's say your stall point, for example, let's say you have, I know Rubicons are a little different, so I'm just going to pick one here. Let's say you have a Sport. Let's say, again, you have 30-inch tires, 321s on it, and it stalls as soon as the RPMs go below 900. So if the RPMs drop below 900, Jeep is stalled. Bink, turns off. Stalled, dead. Have to recrank it, get going again. Now let's say you regeared to a deeper gear set, and let's say you kept the 30-inch tires on there, but you regeared it to, let's say, a 373. Which is a little overkill, but we're going to say that. Now, all of a sudden, your RPMs can drop all the way to, say, 700 before you're going to be stalling. It requires less gas to keep the vehicle moving forward at the RPM with a deeper gear. So I always recommend, if you are a manual, absolutely regear to the correct gear set. It is going to make the biggest difference in the world on the trail. If you said you wanted to go the direction of performance for on-road, daily driver, you don't want to lose top end, you want to be able to be on the interstate driving, going up and down hills. I mean, everything's working great. You go to a bigger tire, but it doesn't drive any different. You want to make sure you keep the great balance. If you said, I'm not going to drive it on the road. And if I do, I'll go 20 miles an hour with my hazards on if I have to. I don't care, but I want it to crawl anything and everything on the trail. And I want it to be this rock crawling machine out there that can crawl its way up and over anything. So if you're going the off-road side, you're going to regear differently. Today, I'm not going to talk about if you're really trying to think about the manual, if you're only going to the off-road side. Those are a more in-depth conversation that we would have. There are more questions I would ask you. Today, I'm going to share with you the balance. If you want to have your awesome on-road, you want to hit the interstate, you don't even want to know you put bigger tires on there with the way it drives. You want it to feel the same. It's awesome. You pull off the line at the red light. You beat the person next to you if you want to. I'm just kidding. And you can be going 90. I wouldn't recommend that, especially with bigger tires. But all right, let's say nothing has changed. But then when you go off-road, you're going to notice it's better. So balance. So when we're talking about balance today and recommendations, we're talking daily driver, we're talking dual purpose, but we're not going to be talking that full off-road focus today. I consider that more, we go into that in our intermediate level where maybe you want to build a rig for the trail. Today, we're talking about we're regearing our daily driver that we may take on the trails and love the difference, and we may not. No judgment there. So what is that sweet spot, that balance that you really want? As we just talked about, torque, output of power that is required, and RPM. We're trying to keep a balance. So we're changing our tires to a 33. Long term, for performance and drivability, you want that on a 4:10 gear ratio. So what does that mean? That means if you have a Rubicon with a 410 in it, it can live on 33s for the rest of its life happily. You're not going to feel a difference off the line. To move those 33-inch tires, you're going to feel like it is still balanced. Now, if you want to go to 35s, long term, you need to regear to a 456. That way, again, you're keeping that balance of power required, torque, and drivability. And of course, you're going to feel an amazing difference off road as well. For 37-inch tires, you want to regear to a 488. And for 40-inch tires, you want to regear to a 513. Remember, I know you might be sitting here looking at this going, wait a minute. This is a balance. This is if you're taking a Jeep that daily drives, goes on trips, is dual purpose. So you drive it to work, you drive it around town, you want it to have great manners. You don't want to be left at the red light. You don't want the RPMs too high. You don't want to put the stress on the engine and transmission. And then it's going to go and perform great and balanced trail riding. This is your magic formula. Now, if you said to me, I want to go to 37-inch tires, but I want a crawling machine that only trail rides, it only goes to the woods, doesn't do anything else. I want to rock crawl. You're going to go deeper than the 488. You're going to go to the 513. So there are some fluctuations. I'm sharing with you the balance, the starting point of if you want a dual purpose vehicle that you're driving down the road and you enjoy driving down the road. The Jeep enjoys driving down the road. It's not struggling. It's not angry. It's not running hot. You're not putting extra stress on it. You're not getting left by the car next to you at the red light. This is your balance. If you were going to want fuel efficiency, the best fuel mileage that you could get, the absolute best on-road driving that you could get, I would recommend do not go to a bigger tire. So there's balance things, right? If you are only daily driver, will never go on a trail ride, you want the absolute best that you can get out of it, I would not go above a 35-inch tire. That my opinion, I'm just being honest. When we start talking fuel efficiency, when we start talking about drivability, when we start talking about its road manners, when we talk about top end speed, because of the gear ratios, I recommend 35s and below. Now, I daily drive my 37s, but I'm not going to drive on a long road trip on 37s, which I know some of you amazing ladies do. But if you do, you don't really care what your fuel efficiency is. It's miles per mile. So just remember that the fuel efficiency is going to change, but by regearing, you're rebalancing. So your fuel mileage is going to be better than if you do not regear. I hope that helped. Let's see, 38-inch tires, stay with 488. That's a great question. A couple of things I would ask you is what Jeep model you have. So do you have a Rubicon or a non-Rubicon? Gladiator, Rubicon. You should be okay to stay with 488 for the 38. And here's something when we start talking about tire size to keep in mind. I would measure and see if it's a full 38-inch tire. Some tires, even though they will say like 35 or 37 or 40 or 42, when you take a tape measure to them, they are a little smaller. But yeah, with 38, you could go either direction. You could either go with the 488 or the 513. Absolutely. We did touch on that. The bigger the gear ratio number becomes, the smaller the ring and pinion gear becomes, and then the weaker that is. Couple more things. When you go to regear, you want to regear for your final tire size platform so that you only need to regear once. This is something, I hound a lot. I talk about so much. I probably sound like a broken record, but I feel like this is so important because you only want to regear once, spend the money once if possible. So here's how I explain it. If you are going to go to 33s, but in the back of your mind, you're like, I kind of like 35, but I'm not ready for 35s. No, you know what? 33s is going to be my ultimate. I don't want to go any bigger. I'm not going to go any bigger. Re-gear so that you can accommodate the 35. You can run the smaller tire with a deeper gear set. Now, it's not going to be great long term forever, right? Because you're gonna lose a little bit of top end speed. But here's the thing: if the number, whatever the biggest number that has come out of your mouth in conversation or popped into your mind when talking about building your Jeep, if you have thought it or spoke it, it is going to end up there. Or the chances of it ending up there are going to be probable. They're going to be high. I recommend, and I've seen this happen. And if it does, it happens. But what I'm trying to do, set you up for long-term success, save you money, frustration. And there's nothing worse than doing something, paying for it, and then realizing you're going to have to do it again and you're going to have to pay for it again. That's frustrating. Less frustration, less money. Whatever the number is that you think or that comes out of your mouth is what you should re-gear for. Even if you said, well, I'm going to 33s. But in the back of your mind, you keep saying, God, but I do like those 35s. Maybe one day. No. I'm going to stay on 33s. Re-gear for the 35s. That way you can drive it on the 33s. And when the day comes that you're like, I'm getting those 35s, it's ready. And I know this from personal experience of helping you amazing ladies through the build concierge service that we do and doing your builds for you. If you get your Jeeps built at other shops, sometimes they're going to tell you that you do not need to re-gear. That's why we're doing this class today, so that you now know why you need to re-gear, what it means to re-gear, what a gear ratio does, how all of that affects the balance in your Jeep. It costs the same to re-gear unless you have a carrier brake that you need to change the carrier out. That would change the cost. But for the most part, you're not paying any more for a 410 gear ratio set or a 456 or a 488 or a 513. The size of the gear ratio, so the size of the gear set, does not dictate the price. The only thing that may change is depending on what Jeep you have. There may be a carrier brake where you have to take out the old carrier, put a different carrier in so it can handle the different gears. Because remember, as we talked about, the bigger the number, the smaller the ring and pinion gear get, but they still have to line up and be able to work and function properly. So sometimes there is a break and a change in what carrier you have to have so that the gears will work correctly. Do keep that in mind. If you have any questions, drop those in the comments and I will personally jump in and answer all of your questions in the comments. Mark your calendar for every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, right here, live on Facebook. We are going to be continuing to talk about building and modifying your Jeep. See you next Tuesday.
We're the Ladyjeepers, living a life and free, climbing every mountain, forging destiny. Sisterhood at the wheel, dreams on the run, living life with passion under the wide open sky.